How can you become successful? And what's holding you back? That's what I'm going to be going over today in the top takeaways of The One Thing by Gary Keller. What's going on, guys? It's Nick from Mindful Mastery. And like I said, we're going to be going over the top takeaways of The One Thing. And honestly, I normally do 5 takeaways for a top takeaways video, but this book just had so much information jam-packed into it, and then pretty much everything just kind of compounded onto itself that I figured 10 takeaways would be much better. And honestly, whenever I first read the title, I was like, The One Thing? How could they have an entire book about making sure you focus on just one thing at a time? But now I'm doing a top 10 takeaways instead of a top 5s. So let's get into it. And at the end of the video, I want you to make sure that you comment what your favorite takeaway was and how you're going to apply it to your life. Takeaway number 1, the one thing. So this is obviously the main idea behind the book. And there's a quote at the beginning that reads, "If you chase 2 rabbits, you won't catch either one." And whenever I read this, it really resonated with me because I realized I was chasing 2 rabbits. And the way that you can look at it is if you chase more than one goal at the same time, then you'll end up spreading yourself too thin. And that's what I was actually doing whenever I first picked up this book. So immediately I cut off as much as I could so I could focus on one thing at a time. And this was just at the beginning of the book. So some examples of just focusing on one thing are Chick-fil-A. What's their one thing? Chicken. Whataburger. Burgers. Starbucks. Coffee. Apple. They kind of switch between MacBooks and iPhones, but whenever they're focused on one thing, they are focused on just one thing. So this leads into the domino effect. And this is like the idea that was actually found. If you have a domino, it can knock over a domino that's 50% larger than it. So if you have a 2-inch domino, then it can knock over a 3-inch domino, and then a 4.5-inch domino. And then by the 18th domino, you're knocking over the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And by the 23rd domino, then you're knocking over the Eiffel Tower. And then by the 31st, Mount Everest. And by the 57th, that domino is almost reaching the moon. So obviously, real life doesn't really work like dominoes. They're not all ordered really neatly, and it's not that easy to. So what Gary Keller suggests is that every morning you should wake up and try and organize your dominoes and set them in a row, and then go to that first domino and then work on that until you knock it over. Because once you knock over that first domino, it will lead to the next one. And it's the idea that success leads to more success. And that's kind of like the rich get richer. That's because they have been successful in the past, which has led to more success in the future. Takeaway number 2, equality is a lie. Now, obviously, this isn't the case whenever it comes to civil rights or justice and things like that. They're mainly talking about your priorities. Not every task that you have is as equally important, right? And a quote from this chapter is that achievers always work from a clear sense of priority. And an example of this is the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto principle, which was discovered by an Italian economist who found that 20% of the land produced 80% of the crop. It was then related to a lot of other things. So businesses, 20% of the businesses produce 80% of the revenue. And then for myself, 20% of the time that I spend working on something produces 80% of the actual results for it. So you need to take this and then look at your to-do lists, because to-do lists are oftentimes just excuses to make us feel productive, and they're just small things that don't actually lead towards our success. So you need to apply the 80-20 principle to it and identify the success items, and to turn your to-do list into a success list. You can also look at this importance urgency matrix to identify the urgency and importance of your tasks so that you can begin to prioritize which is important and what you need to get done first, and then kind of cut out the things that aren't really important at all, even if they're urgent. Takeaway number 3, multitasking is a lie. So researchers set out to find what made people good at multitasking. But what they actually found was that while some people are good at doing multiple tasks at one time, they're not actually good at the single tasks that they're doing. This leads to the quote that multitasking is merely an excuse to screw up more than one thing at a time. So you can kind of think of your ability to focus as your eye. And so your vision is only focused on one point at a time, right? But you can see the peripheral area. And then you can also try and focus on your peripheral so that you can kind of see it better. And while you might see it a little bit better, what your vision is actually focused on decreases in the amount that you can actually see. So instead of actually seeing more, you end up seeing less, which is the same idea whenever it comes to multitasking, because your mind is actually switching from one point to another. It's not actually doing multiple tasks at the same time. And every time that you switch tasks, it has to go through the process of switching and then reorientating itself to the task that you're working on. So I've got 3 statistics for you. The first is that 16% of fatal car accidents are caused by phone distractions. The second is that by merely talking on the cell phone decreases your focus by 40%. And the third is that research has estimated that about 33% of time at work is wasted by employees who try to multitask and end up getting distracted because their mind is in a state of trying to switch tasks each and every second, which makes them more susceptible to accepting distractions and then going and working on them. Takeaway number 4, discipline is a lie. Now, whenever you think of successful people, let's just take The Rock as an example. He is pretty disciplined, right? I mean, he wakes up at 3:30 or 4 every morning, and then he goes to the gym, and then he works 12 to 14 hours a day. So it makes it seem like he is a super disciplined person. But that's not actually the case. What really happened is that he built up habits around that discipline over time. So I don't know exactly how it happened, but I think that it probably happened like this. So first, he started working out every single day. And then he started working 9 hours a day. And then he kind of worked it up to 12 or 14 hours. And lastly, he started waking up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning. So he didn't really need to be super disciplined, or he doesn't need to be right now, but he needed to be whenever he was establishing those habits. And Gary Keller talks about how long it takes to establish those habits, and it was found that it takes about 66 days on average to establish a habit. Now, it does kind of vary depending on the complexity of the habit. So if it's very complex, then it could take up to 254 days. But if it's super simple, then it takes around 18 days. But don't get too focused on the 254 days. Focus more on the 66 days. Because what's really important is the beginning of establishing that habit. Because that's when you are required to be the most disciplined, right? Because the more that you do it, the easier it gets to do. So even if the habit is super complex, by the 66th day, you would require so much less discipline compared to whenever you first began the habit. So let me give you some examples of my own habits that I have developed. So every morning, I make my bed. This helps me start off my day with a victory and makes me feel better about myself. And it's something super simple. Another simple one is washing the dishes after I use them. This helps clean up my space, which makes me feel much better about myself. The next one is meditating. I've been doing that for 2 or 3 years now, and it's a little bit more complex, but I do it every single morning without even thinking about it. So you don't even have to start off with super complex habits. Just start off with small, easy habits, right? And it goes back to the domino effect. Start off with that 2-inch domino, and then knock over the 3-inch, and then keep on going until you're reaching the moon. Takeaway number 5. Willpower is not on will call. So most people overestimate the amount that they think they'll be able to get done because they think they'll be able to commit to what they plan on working on, right? And this is because they overestimate their motivation and willpower in order to do that things, even though those things kind of fluctuate, motivation and willpower. And that's because they don't really understand willpower. But people who are better at exercising their willpower have been shown to be more successful than people who do not know how to manage their willpower. It goes to the Marshmallow Experiment, where kids were offered one marshmallow, but if they waited 15 minutes, then they could get a second marshmallow. But they could not eat the first marshmallow, otherwise they would only get the first one. So they then found later on that those kids that did not eat the first marshmallow and waited for the second one were much more successful in grades and in their careers. So what is there to know about willpower? So you can kind of think of it like a battery. Whenever you wake up in the morning, it's fully charged, and the more decisions that you have to make throughout the day, the more it gets depleted. So this is kind of why I like to wake up early and then begin working on things, because that's whenever my willpower is at its maximum, right? And an example of how willpower can be depleted is there was a study where there was two groups of participants. One group had to memorize a 2-digit number, and another group had to memorize a 7-digit number. So it took a lot of willpower to remember the 7-digit number, right? And then whenever they were on their way to the room where they had to remember it, they were offered either cake or fruit. And then those that had to remember the 7-digit willpower were much more likely to pick the piece of cake rather than the 2-digit number group. Now, another thing that's important is your energy and fuel levels. So another study found that whenever judges first got to work, they were very likely to allow the person off on probation. But whenever it got to the end of that period, it got down to almost a 0% chance that they would let someone off on probation. So it is very important that you make sure that you are rested and not hungry whenever you begin your work, in order to make sure that your willpower is at its strongest. Takeaway number 6, the focusing question. So this question is super important, and you need to make sure that you ask yourself it multiple times throughout the day and continue to for a long period of time. Because by asking yourself this, it will help your brain retrain itself in order to think about how it can help you become successful. And that question is, what's the one thing that I can do such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? Which you can word it a couple different ways in order to help you achieve those goals, which I'll kind of be covering in the next couple of takeaways. Takeaway number 7, visualize the process, not the result. So there was a study that covered students who tried to visualize the process of studying an exam versus students who tried to visualize the process of getting a good grade on that exam. And they found that those that visualized the process were much more likely to get a good grade because they studied more and they started earlier than those that just visualized getting a good grade on the exam. So I want you to make sure that you actually visualize it, because think about it. Whenever you visualize something, you're much more likely to do it. Whenever you're at work or at school, you're probably thinking about going home and watching Netflix or taking a nap or doing something unproductive like that, right? And then that's pretty much what you more often than not go and do. But it goes the same way with doing something productive. So visualize doing that one thing that will help you become successful, and you'll be much more likely to do it. And you can start to do this by planning to the now. This helps to relate your someday goal to what you're doing now towards achieving it. So in order to do that, then we'll take a look at the diagram from the one thing. So first, you want to start off with your someday goal. And from there, you want to ask yourself the focusing question, what's the one thing I could do 5 years from now or in 5 years that by doing it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? And then do the same thing for 1 year out, and then the same thing for a month, and then a week, and then a day, and then right now. And this will help connect what you're doing right now to achieving that goal, making you so much more motivated to actually doing it. The 8th takeaway, time blocking. This will help you become so much more productive, because if you plan out times where you're going to work on the one thing, then you don't have to think about what you're going to do right before you do it. You just go into it because you had planned it out, right? So you need to try and minimize your distractions and cut off everybody else from your world. So one thing that's really bad for me is my cell phone. It doesn't even have to go off. If I just see it in the corner of my eye and there's a flicker, which I'll generally see just because of lighting and stuff like that, my mind will be like, oh, did someone text me? And then I'll be distracted. And 99% of the time, whenever I go to check it, nobody even texted me. So I just wasted time. And then I switched my focus from the work I was working on to my phone, and then I had to switch back and reorient myself, right? And then another thing that you need to make sure that you cut off is people that will come and interrupt you. So you need to put up signs that say, please do not disturb or not here, so that people just go away and don't interrupt you from what you're doing and cause you to get distracted. Now, you might be worried that there'll be something super important during that time if you're in a job where you have to work with a lot of people. But don't worry about that, because that will very rarely ever happen, and people will begin to work around your schedule and you will become so much more productive as a result. Gary Keller recommends blocking off around 4 hours in order to maximize the amount that you can get done towards your one thing. And if you can do more, then do more. But there's also a lot of people that can't do just 4 hours straight, even though that's what's recommended. So I would recommend that you do 1 hour here, 1 hour there, as much as you can, as long as you reach that 4 hour goal. Because in all honesty, our lives are pretty crazy. So whenever you become more successful, then you can do 4 hours in a row. Right now, you just have to try and fit it in whatever schedule that you can. Now, another thing you need to do is time block to plan every week. So I would recommend doing this on Sunday. Time block a 1 hour period where you plan what you're gonna do that week, and then also ask yourself the focusing question again, and then make sure that you are on track to achieve your someday goal every single week. And this will help to rewire your brain, like I was talking about, so that it'll be focused on your success. The 9th takeaway, the 4 thieves. And those thieves are the inability to say no, the fear of chaos, poor personal health, and an unsupportive environment. So, inability to say no. Most people often, whenever they ask you for help, you end up going and helping them and get distracted, right? So, you need to learn how to say no. I know it'll seem like you're letting that person down or you're ruining that relationship, but you need to focus on becoming successful. So focus on that one thing and continue to say no unless it contributes to that one thing. The next is fear of chaos. So that's basically saying that things are going to get messy, especially your workspace. So you need to get used to that and not worry about it too much. But I tend to disagree with this point just because I really like to have a clean workspace, because otherwise my mind will get distracted by the things on my desk, or I'll become uneasy with the mess. So if you can focus and have a cluttered workspace, then that's fine. But if you can't do that, then I would recommend that at the end of your workday, clean up everything so that whenever you start working, you don't have to worry about cleaning up, or you won't be distracted by things that are on your desk since you cleaned up the day beforehand. Now, the 3rd thief is poor personal health, and the things that you need to do in order to make sure that you do not have poor personal health is eat healthy and exercise, obviously, and then also sleep. Get enough sleep. Now, this is still obvious, but a lot of people think that they're the exception to the rule. So I want to really cover that a little bit more. Most people think that they can go with 5 or 6 hours of sleep, but there is less than 0.001% chance that you are one of those people. And research has shown that if you get 6 hours of sleep consistently compared to the recommended 7 to 9 hours, then you'll be much less likely to be able to focus on what you're doing throughout the day. The 4th thief is environments that do not support your goals. So that's the people around you and the place that's around you. So if people are constantly being negative towards your goals, or they don't have habits that are conducive to what you're trying to be like, then you need to cut those people off so that you can focus on the one thing. And if the place is very distracting, the place that you're working at, then you need to try and relocate to a different place so that you can focus a lot better and improve your ability to work on that one thing. Takeaway number 10, the 3 commitments. And those commitments are the path to mastery, move from E to P, and live the accountability cycle. So the path to mastery is essentially saying that you need to commit 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 250 days a year, and continue to do that until you become successful. The second commitment, move from E to P, is moving from entrepreneurial to purposeful. So whenever you're entrepreneurial, then you're just doing kind of what comes naturally to you, and you're not really trying to push yourself that much. But whenever you're doing something purposefully, then you are being creative and trying to innovate and expand on what you're doing so that you can become more and more successful rather than just resting where you're at. Now, the third one is live the accountability cycle. And so most people, whenever they encounter a problem or they make a mistake, they just kind of push it off and hope that it goes away or blame something else. But if you live the accountability cycle, then you look at what happened or you look at the problem that's facing you and you think, how can I solve this? You take responsibility for what's going on and you work towards improving it and becoming successful. So those are my 10 takeaways from The One Thing by Gary Keller. Please don't forget to comment the one thing that you like the most and how you're going to apply it to your life. Now, let me get into my favorite thing. And that was the takeaway of focusing on the process and visualizing the process rather than the result. And I like this one really because it made me realize that I was focusing too much on the result as well. I visualized becoming successful and things like that, but then it didn't really connect to what I was doing right now, so I didn't have motivation to do anything, and then I often procrastinate on things. So now that I am focusing on what I am going to do and visualizing the process, it's helping to increase my motivation and increase the likelihood that I'm going to do it. So what is my someday goal? My someday goal is to become financially free. And the one thing that I can do in 5 years is to establish either 3 sources of income or a rental company so that I can begin to have a good amount of passive income coming in. To achieve that, my 1-year goal is to establish 1 source of passive income or to make this channel super successful so that it can help catapult me into a new passive income source. And this channel will also generally provide a good passive income as well. And then my 1 month goal is to record 10 videos. And then my 1 week is to record 3 videos. And then my today or right now is to record this video. So I'm really trying to make sure that I visualize all this so that I can connect what I'm doing right now to the future and motivate me to reaching that one thing that I want in life. I hope you enjoyed the video today, guys, and have a great day.